Mornings. Am I right? The alarm clock's a monster, the coffee's lukewarm, and the only thing standing between me and sweet, sweet oblivion, aka my warm bed, is the dreaded chore of taking out the trash. It's a ritual, a mundane, utterly unglamorous ritual that I perform every Tuesday morning like clockwork. Grab the overflowing bags, wrestle them into the bins, roll the bins to the curb, and try not to get any stray coffee grounds on my pajamas. You know the drill. So, this particular Tuesday morning, I'm shuffling around in my pajamas, bleary-eyed and grumpy, armed with a mountain of garbage bags. I open the back door, ready to face the trash can gauntlet, and wait. Where are they? I blink. I rub my eyes. I scan the area. Nope. They're definitely gone. My trusty green trash cans, my faithful receptacles of refuse, my partners in grime, vanished. Poof. Like they'd been abducted by aliens, or, something equally improbable. My initial reaction? Confusion. Pure, unadulterated confusion. Did I forget to put them out last week? I mutter to myself, racking my brain. Nope. I distinctly remember wrestling that rogue pizza box into the bin. It was a struggle, a memorable struggle. Then, disbelief. This has got to be a prank, I think. One of my neighbors is messing with me. I mean, who steals trash cans? It's not exactly a high-value heist. They're trash cans. They're full of, trash. Who would want them? I check behind the shed. I check behind the bushes. I even check behind the slightly overgrown rose bushes, just in case they'd somehow magically teleported themselves there. Nothing. They're just gone, like they never existed. Like I've entered some kind of trash canless dimension. It's surreal and slightly unsettling. And then I get angry, because this isn't just a prank. This is something else, something more sinister, something HOA related. I can feel it in my bones. And I'm not gonna like it, not one bit. These guys are obsessed with neighborhood standards, the way some people are obsessed with collecting stamps. Only instead of stamps, they collect complaints. They're like the self-appointed lawn police of Oak Garden Estates, patrolling the streets for rogue dandelions and unauthorized garden gnomes. They've probably got a special hotline dedicated to reporting unsightly refuse receptacles. And sure enough, a few days later, the official notice arrives. Crisp white envelope, fancy font, the whole 9 yards. It's from the Architectural Harmony Committee. Yes, they actually have a committee for that. Apparently, my trash cans were deemed, wait for it, unsightly. Unsightly? Seriously? They're trash cans. Their entire purpose in life is to hold trash. What, are they supposed to be decorated with little bows and ribbons? Maybe I should have painted them to match the beige houses in the neighborhood? The letter goes on to say my unsightly receptacles detracted from the aesthetic harmony of Oak Garden Estates. Aesthetic harmony? Give me a break. It's a suburb, not a Renaissance painting. And then the kicker. Not only did they deem my trash cans unsightly, but they also confiscated them, stole them, basically. And then, to add insult to injury, they slapped me with a $250 fine. $250 for having trash cans. That's it. That's the moment I snapped. They messed with the wrong garbage wrangler. They wanted aesthetic harmony. I'd give them aesthetic harmony. But it wasn't going to be pretty or beige. Okay, so the HOA stole my trash cans and fined me $250 for the crime of having trash cans. Yeah, that's not going to stand. I'm not about to let a bunch of beige-obsessed busybodies dictate how I dispose of my garbage. This calls for retaliation. Glorious, over-the-top, utterly ridiculous retaliation. Unsightly, huh? I muttered to myself, rereading the infuriating letter. They want aesthetic harmony? I'll give them aesthetic harmony. The idea sparked in my mind, big and bold and beautifully petty. If they wanted to play the aesthetic harmony game, I'd play it too. But I wasn't going to play by their rules. Oh no, I was going to play by my own rules. Rules that involved a dumpster. A massive, industrial-sized dumpster. It was perfect. A giant metal middle finger to the HOA. and their obsession with pristine lawns. A monument to their overzealous rules and their, shall we say, unique approach to waste management. The image popped into my head. A huge, overflowing dumpster parked right in front of the HOA office. A beacon of garbage. It was beautiful. It was ridiculous. It was exactly the kind of aesthetic harmony the HOA deserved. I knew right then and there. This wasn't just about getting my trash cans back. This was about making a statement, about standing up to the Beige Brigade and their ridiculous rules, and about having a little bit of fun in the process, because honestly, those HOA letters were starting to get on my nerves. And a giant, overflowing dumpster? That was exactly the kind of therapy I needed. It was going to be glorious. Absolutely glorious. Okay, so Operation Dumpster was a go. I needed a dumpster. Not just any dumpster. I needed a monster of a dumpster. The kind you see on construction sites, the kind that could hold, a mountain of garbage. A monument to refuse. A testament to, to the sheer volume of trash the HOA clearly thought was unsightly. I hit up Google, naturally. Dumpster rental, I typed, and a list of local companies popped up. I called a few, asking about sizes, prices, and delivery options. I played it cool, of course. Just doing some spring cleaning, I told them. Got a lot of stuff to get rid of. They didn't need to know the stuff was destined for the HOA's pristine doorstep. I settled on a behemoth, a 30-yarder. This thing was huge. It was practically the size of a small car. It was rusty. It was dented. It was perfect. It was exactly the kind of imposing, garbage-hauling monstrosity I needed to make my point. The guy who delivered it was a bit of a character himself, a grizzled old trucker with a twinkle in his eye. He clearly knew what I was up to. HOA trouble, eh? He chuckled, winking. This baby'll teach him a lesson. He dropped it off in my driveway, and it looked like a spaceship had landed. It was so big, it barely fit. I had to maneuver it carefully to avoid scraping the side of my house. It was a tight squeeze, but I managed it. And then came the strategic placement. This wasn't just about having a dumpster. This was about making a statement, a loud statement. And that meant location, location, location. My plan was simple, yet elegant. I was going to park this monstrous metal beast right in front of the HOA office. A garbage-filled gift delivered straight to their doorstep. I waited until nightfall, naturally. I didn't want any nosy neighbors, or worse, HOA patrols, interfering with my masterpiece. I hooked up my truck to the dumpster. It had wheels, thank goodness, and slowly, carefully, towed it down the street. It was a bit of a challenge. The dumpster was heavy and it was dark, and I may have had a few close calls with parked cars. But I persevered. This was too important. Finally, I arrived at the HOA office. It was late. The building was dark and deserted. Perfect. I positioned the dumpster directly in front of the main entrance, blocking the doorway like a metal gatekeeper. It was a glorious sight. A huge, rusty, overflowing dumpster, a monument to the HOA's obsession with aesthetic harmony. It was perfect. Absolutely perfect. And the best part? It was just the beginning. Okay, so the dumpster was in place. A hulking metal behemoth blocking the entrance to the HOA office. It was a masterpiece of petty revenge, a monument to bureaucratic overreach, and a testament to the sheer audacity of my plan. But it wasn't complete yet. It needed content. And that content needed to be, let's just say it needed to be memorable. But first, the delivery, the grand unveiling, the moment I unleashed my garbage-filled gift upon the unsuspecting HOA. It was early morning, just as the sun was starting to peek over the horizon. I parked a safe distance away and watched. I wanted to savor this moment. I wanted to witness the reactions. The first to arrive were the early morning dog walkers. They stopped, they stared, they pointed. Their faces were a mixture of confusion, amusement, and a tiny bit of fear, maybe. I mean, it was a massive, overflowing dumpster parked right in front of the HOA office. It wasn't exactly a normal sight. Then came the commuters, rushing to work, bleary-eyed and caffeine-deprived. They slowed down, craning their necks to get a better look. Some chuckled, some shook their heads, some just stared in disbelief. It was like a roadside attraction, only instead of a giant ball of twine, it was a giant ball of, well, garbage. And then the HOA arrived. Oh, the HOA. Their reactions were priceless. They pulled up in their pristine beige SUVs, ready to start their day of neighborhood standard enforcement, and, well, they were greeted by a mountain of trash. Their faces, it was a symphony of emotions. Shock, obviously. Disgust, definitely. And then, rage. Pure, unadulterated rage. Mrs. Shelley, the HOA president, looked like she was about to spontaneously combust. Her face turned an alarming shade of purple, and her mouth was moving, but no words came out. She looked like a goldfish gasping for air. The other HOA members weren't much better. They were all staring at the dumpster, their mouths agape, their eyes wide with disbelief. It was like they couldn't comprehend what they were seeing, like they'd stumbled into some kind of alternate reality where trash cans ruled the world. I could practically hear their internal monologues. That dumpster! Who, how? They were speechless. Utterly, completely speechless, which, honestly, was the best part. Their outrage was so intense, it had rendered them incapable of coherent thought. It was beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. And it was just the beginning, because the dumpster wasn't just there to be there. It was there to make a point, a big, smelly, overflowing point. And that meant it needed content. Lots and lots of content, and I had just the stuff to fill it. Okay, so the dumpster was in place, the HOA was losing their minds, and it was time for the deposit. This wasn't just about having a dumpster. This was about making a statement. A big, smelly, overflowing statement. And that meant it needed content. Lots and lots of content. Actual, real, smelly garbage. The kind of garbage the HOA clearly thought was too unsightly for public consumption. I'd been preparing for this moment, naturally. I'd been collecting. Let's just say I'd been strategically accumulating offensive items for the past few days. Household trash, yard waste, you name it. I even borrowed some particularly pungent compost from my neighbor's garden. Don't worry, I returned it later, after the HOA had their fun. I started loading the dumpster. It was a glorious, disgusting symphony of refuse. Overflowing garbage bags, overflowing with, well, you know, the usual suspects. Pizza boxes, takeout containers, junk mail, the remnants of last night's questionable culinary experiment. The kind of stuff everyone throws away, but the HOA apparently deemed too unsightly for my trash cans. Then came the yard waste. Clippings from my slightly overgrown lawn, branches from my slightly unruly rose bushes, and a veritable mountain of leaves. Because, you know, aesthetic harmony. And then, the strategically placed offensive items. A half-eaten watermelon, strategically positioned near the top, its bright pink flesh gleaming in the morning sun. A bag of particularly pungent compost, nestled amongst the leaves, its aroma wafting gently in the breeze. A few strategically placed, shall we say, questionable items I'd found lurking in the back of my fridge. You know, just to add a little extra flavor to the mix. It was a masterpiece of garbage, a veritable Mount Trashmore, a monument to refuse. It was perfect, absolutely perfect. But it wasn't quite complete yet. It needed a finishing touch, a message, a clear, concise, and utterly sarcastic message directed straight at the HOA. I grabbed a piece of cardboard, a marker, and wrote, "Since you love stealing trash, here's some more." I taped the sign to the side of the dumpster, right where everyone could see it. It was simple. It was direct. It was dripping with sarcasm. It was perfect. And then I stepped back, admired my handiwork, and waited. I knew it wouldn't be long before the HOA discovered my little gift, and I couldn't wait to see their faces. It was going to be glorious. Absolutely glorious. Okay, so the dumpster was deployed, the garbage was deposited, the message was written. All that was left was to wait for the inevitable HOA meltdown, and it didn't take long. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck. The HOA members arrived at their office one by one in their pristine business attire, ready to tackle another day of neighborhood standard enforcement. And then they saw it, the dumpster, the mountain of garbage, the sign. Their reactions were, well, they were a sight to behold. It was like watching a group of synchronized swimmers suddenly encounter a shark. Their faces, it was a symphony of shock, disgust, and pure, unadulterated panic. They stopped dead in their tracks, their mouths agape, their eyes wide with disbelief. It was like they couldn't comprehend what they were seeing. Like they'd stumbled into some kind of garbage-themed horror movie. Some of them recoiled, as if the dumpster was emitting some kind of toxic fumes, which, let's be honest, it probably was. Others just stared, their faces a mixture of confusion and disgust. It was like they'd never seen garbage before, or at least not in such abundance. And then there was Mrs. Shelley. Oh, Mrs. Shelley. She arrived in her pristine white SUV, looking like she was ready to conquer the world, or at least the landscaping of Oak Garden Estates. And then she saw it. The dumpster, the mountain of garbage, the sign, her face. It was a masterpiece of rage. Her eyes narrowed, her lips thinned, and her face turned an alarming shade of purple. She looked like she was about to explode, like she was going to spontaneously combust from sheer, unadulterated fury. She let out a shriek, a high-pitched, ear-piercing shriek that could probably be heard all the way down the street. That garbage! She shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the dumpster. How could anyone... She was beyond words. She was incandescent. She was apoplectic. She was basically a human pressure cooker about to blow its top. The other HOA members were scrambling around her, trying to calm her down. But it was no use. She was on a rampage, a garbage-fueled rampage. This is unacceptable, she shrieked. This is a travesty. This is an outrage. This is unsightly. There's that word again. She was pacing back and forth, her arms flailing, her face redder than a ripe tomato. She looked like she was about to charge at the dumpster, ready to wrestle it to the ground. The other HOA members were just staring at her, their faces a mixture of fear and amusement. They were clearly terrified of her wrath, but I could see a few of them trying to stifle a laugh. It was glorious, absolutely glorious. The HOA's panic was palpable. They were losing their minds. And I was just sitting back watching the show, sipping my coffee, and enjoying every single minute of it. Okay, so Mrs. Shelley was having a full-blown meltdown, the other HOA members were trying to look busy, and the dumpster sat there, a silent, smelly testament to my, shall we say, unique approach to waste management. The next step was inevitable, the call to the cops. Sure enough, a couple of police cars showed up, sirens wailing, lights flashing. It was like a scene from a bad cop drama, only instead of a high-speed chase, it was a high-stakes dumpster standoff. The HOA members, led by Mrs. Shelley, who had somehow managed to compose herself slightly, swarmed the officers, pointing accusing fingers at the dumpster, at the sign, and, of course, at me. "He did it!" Mrs. Shelley shrieked, her voice still a little shaky. "He dumped all this garbage here! It's illegal! It's vandalism! It's unsightly!" There's that word again. The other HOA members chimed in, nodding vigorously and echoing her accusations. "Illegal dumping!" they cried. "Disruption of the peace! Aesthetic terrorism!" Okay, maybe they didn't say that last one, but I wouldn't have been surprised. The police officers, bless their hearts, looked a little bewildered. They were clearly not expecting to be dealing with a garbage-related crime scene. They looked at the dumpster, they looked at the HOA members, they looked at me. They looked like they were wondering if they'd accidentally wandered onto the set of a reality TV show. They approached me cautiously, like I was some kind of garbage-wielding maniac. "Sir," one of the officers said, We've received a complaint about illegal dumping. Can you explain what's going on here? I smiled sweetly. Officer, I said, I'd be happy to explain. I pulled out my trusty folder, filled with documentation. First, I said, I'd like to show you this. I handed him the fine from the HOA. As you can see, the HOA fined me $250 for having trash cans. They deemed them unsightly. I rolled my eyes. They then proceeded to confiscate my trash cans. I showed him the photos. Photos of my missing trash cans, neatly labeled and dated. These are my trash cans, I explained. Or rather, were my trash cans, until the HOA decided to appropriate them. Then I pulled out the rental agreement for the dumpster. This, I said, is a receipt for the rental of this dumpster. As you can see, it's legally rented in my name. I paused for dramatic effect. So, I continued, I'd like to understand what exactly is illegal about this. The HOA stole my property. I'm simply returning it, with interest. The police officers looked at each other, then back at the HOA members, then back at me. They were clearly trying to wrap their heads around the situation. It wasn't exactly your typical police call. So, one of the officers said slowly, let me get this straight. The HOA stole your trash cans and then fined you for it, and now you're returning their garbage. Precisely, I said, with interest. The officers chuckled. They couldn't help it. The absurdity of the situation was just too much. The HOA members, however, were not amused. Mrs. Shelley was fuming. But, it's garbage, she sputtered. It's unsightly. Yes, ma'am, one of the officers said politely. It is. He turned back to me. Sir, do you have any proof that this garbage belongs to the HOA? I grinned. Officer, I said, I have a feeling that this garbage speaks for itself. I gestured to the overflowing dumpster, the pungent aroma wafting gently in the breeze. I believe the HOA will find familiar items within. The officers chuckled again. They got it. They understood the, shall we say, nuance of the situation, and they were clearly enjoying it. Ma'am, one of the officers said to Mrs. Shelley, I'm afraid there's nothing we can do. Mr. Paul has provided documentation showing that he legally rented this dumpster. And as he pointed out, the contents appear to be related to the missing trash cans. Mrs. Shelley was speechless. She was defeated. Outsmarted by a garbage-filled dumpster. It was poetic justice at its finest. Okay, so the police had spoken. My garbage gift was perfectly legal, technically. The HOA, predictably, was not happy. But they were stuck. They couldn't arrest me for returning stolen property, even if it was, well, a mountain of stolen property. And smelly, and overflowing. The officers, bless their hearts, tried to maintain a professional demeanor, but I could see the amusement in their eyes. They knew what was going on. They understood the, shall we say, artistic statement I was making. Ma'am, one of the officers said to Mrs. Shelley, trying to suppress a grin, I understand your frustration, but Mr. Paul has provided documentation showing that he legally rented this dumpster, and as he pointed out, the contents appear to be related to the missing trash cans. He paused, then added with a twinkle in his eye, perhaps you should discuss this further with your waste management department. Waste management department, Mrs. Shelley sputtered. But, we are the waste management department? The officer just shrugged. Well then, he said, I suggest you get to work. And with that, the police drove off, leaving the HOA to deal with the, shall we say, consequences of their actions. The scene that followed was glorious. Absolutely glorious. The HOA members, dressed in their pristine business attire, their perfectly pressed suits and their perfectly polished shoes, were forced to, well, to get their hands dirty. Literally. They were given gloves, masks, thankfully, and large garbage bags. And then, they had to start sorting through the dumpster Bag by bag, item by item, they had to sift through the evidence of their overzealousness. It was a sight to behold. Mrs. Shelley, her white suit now covered in, let's just say unidentifiable substances, was frantically digging through a bag of particularly pungent compost, her face a mask of disgust. Mr. Peterson, the HOA treasurer, was gingerly holding a half-eaten watermelon, trying not to gag. The other HOA members were just staring at the garbage, their faces a mixture of horror and resignation. The irony was delicious. These people, who were so obsessed with aesthetic harmony and neighborhood standards, were now forced to wade through a mountain of garbage. Their own garbage. Garbage they had deemed too unsightly for public consumption. Passers-by stopped to watch the spectacle, chuckling and shaking their heads. Some even took pictures. The HOA dumpster debacle was the talk of the town. It was a local legend in the making. And me? I was just sitting back, watching the show, sipping my coffee and enjoying every single minute of it. Finally, after hours of sorting, sifting, and gagging, the HOA managed to clear the dumpster. They were exhausted, humiliated, and covered in, let's just say they weren't looking their best. And then, the moment I'd been waiting for. My trash cans were returned, cleaned, polished, and accompanied by a groveling apology from Mrs. Shelley herself. "Mr. Paul," she said, her voice barely a whisper, we apologize for the misunderstanding regarding your refuse receptacles. We were wrong." "Apology accepted," I said with a smile. "Just try not to misunderstand my trash cans again." And with that, the HOA dumpster debacle was over. But the legend lived on. It became a symbol of resistance against overbearing HOAs, a testament to the power of garbage, and a reminder that sometimes the best way to fight bureaucracy is with a little bit of, you get the idea.